Great. Hello, everyone. This is Kent Larsen, my colleague from MIT Media Lab.
And this is Gesa Zimmer from HafenCity University.
I warmly welcome all of you to the City Science Summit 2019 here in Hamburg. Great. Kent Larsen and I, we are very happy to welcome you here and to see you all here. Those who organized the conference are all city researchers who come from different disciplines and from many different parts of the world. And I think we have two things at least in common. First, we are all trying to create and communicate new ideas for future cities on a very local level, but also on a very global level. Secondly, we are all very much interested in how technology, and in our case, it's mainly driven by data science, influences and improves urban living. This conference is organized in the same way. It's not too academic, it's much more about proposing concrete ideas on how cities can be organized in the future. The City Science Summit takes place once a year in different countries in the world. MIT established a big city science network. The network consists of, I think, about 10 cities and partners in the world. And I warmly welcome all our research colleagues from all over the world. They are sitting here in the audience. And they will also contribute to the workshop day that we have tomorrow at HafenCity University. This year, the summit takes place here in Hamburg, and we are very proud of being the host and proud that MIT decided to bring the summit here to Hamburg. And because we have a collaboration, our collaboration was set up in 2015, and I think I can say that it's quite successful. We have been the first CityScienceLab in the whole network, and our research group grew. We are something like 30 people, like your group, exactly. And we have a very productive and very fruitful exchange, and I'm very grateful that I can welcome you and also give some of our results to the audience here, of our research results. We will take another big step forward in the coming months. Because we are starting to collaborate with the United Nations, I warmly welcome Kirill Joski from Geneva and also Maurizio Gazzola from Vienna, the two representatives from the United Nations. They both came because we are going to sign a letter of intent between HafenCity University and the United Nations for setting up an UNTIL. UNTIL means United Nations Technology and Innovation Lab, and it's a new initiative that the UN started. And this is very special for the city of Hamburg also, because as you may know, most of the UN institutions are in Bonn, the former capital of Germany, but this one goes to Hamburg. Because the United Nations was so happy and interested in our work and our lab work here, that they decided to settle it here. This cooperation is supported by the Federal Foreign Office of Germany. And it's also a great recognition for our work, and I thank you very much for your support and also trust in our research. Before we start now, I would like to welcome our keynote speaker. It's Lord Norman Foster. Where is he? I can't see you. He's backstage. Lord Norman Foster. I'm very pleased and honored that he will be our keynote speaker. Kent will be introducing him in a moment, but I would like to welcome Norman Foster and also his wife, Elena Foster. I see her there in the audience here to Hamburg on behalf of our university and also personally. I'm very happy that you are here, and I'm really looking forward to your lecture, like probably everyone does here in the audience. Now I hand over to you, Kent.
Thank you. So I'm sure some of you have been wondering about this title here, Cities Without. And I just thought I would explain this a bit. So with the looming societal problems that we're all aware of, like climate change and also this extreme urbanization trend where we're looking at 3.5 billion people possibly living in informal settlements without access to proper water and power and sanitation and shelter, we are asking the question, can we envision a future without all of these increasingly obsolete systems that I believe are no longer working well? Systems related to power and sanitation and urban planning and mobility, et cetera. And can we envision a future with all of these new possibilities that we see emerging that are much more community-driven, much more bottom-up, much more distributed and lightweight, and ultimately, in many cases, autonomous systems that are related to design and public policy and technology. So today is the first part of a 2-day program. So this is the public program where we will just outline at a very high level some of these ideas. Tomorrow, we're bringing our network and people from the community together for a series of workshops with much more detailed talks and conversations with the idea of establishing priorities, establishing new projects, and ideally establishing more and richer collaborations between the group, so, the people in the network and the institutions. So you all are welcome to join us tomorrow if you're interested. And I just want to say I am thrilled to be here in Hamburg. I've been to Hamburg many times. It's where we put together the first node in our network, and the Hamburg group here is, I think, the most successful in the network. It's also has the most people, and our collaboration has been incredibly fruitful. So we came to realize that we could do good work at MIT, but unless we built a network and leveraged the skills and capabilities and the local knowledge of people in the network, we could no longer, we couldn't have the impact that we thought we needed to have. So it's great to be here. Thank you, Gesa.
Yeah, okay, I think we will have some greetings. We will start with you, Mr. Müller-Litzko. He's our new president at HafenCity University. But he's not only the president, he's also professor of economics and digitalization. And as you can already hear, he is also an expert on our topics. Here you come more from economy, but you're also interested in the whole digital smart city discourse. So he's also a big supporter of our initiative here. And thank you very much for coming and sending us some greetings. The floor is yours.
Dear Lord Forster, dear Kent Larsen, dear Gesa Ziemer, dear researchers from the MIT Media Lab and the International City Science Network, distinguished guests from Hamburg and all over the world, welcome to Hamburg. My today's 90-minute lecture is about the basic principles of AI in smart cities. Oh, wait, sorry. Today it is without. So, Alfie without a lecture. Good luck for you. So, no, seriously. Firstly, I'd like to welcome you, friends from all over the world, to the third City Science Summit taking place for the first time in Hamburg. And I think the city of Hamburg can be proud that you have organized such a well-working conference, and I hope that you're going to enjoy the next couple of days here in Hamburg. Secondly, I have to congratulate you and thank the whole CSL team, and especially Gesa, not only managing director of the CSL, but also vice president of the HCU, our university. And I think it is a special applause only for you, because you have done so well. It is outstanding, your efforts, and I think for the city of Hamburg as well as for the HCU, it's a great effort that you bring it straight forward to make a better city out of Hamburg. So congratulations. Thirdly, I'd like to address the main motto of the conference. It is cities without. I really love that. And Kent told you what it means, cities without. So there are many withouts, without cars, without pollution, without housing shortage. That would be greatest cities, right? We all love that. We want to have that. And we want to have that right here, right now. But I think there's another without. And this is the most important thing for me. And this is the reason why I want to talk about that shortly. For me, it is cities without fear. If we have worldwide people suppressed, they have to flee, they have to be refugees because of oppression, wars, and dictators, I think our cities have to be the place for those who have lost everything. So, and when I heard the first time about HCU, and they asked me if I'm interested in the position of being president there, you start Googling, everybody does it, right? So, and I found Finding Places, and I was deeply impressed about Finding Places, and I read a lot about CSL. And that was really so good that I said, yes, this is a fantastic university. I have to do that. And luckily, I won. So, in a free world, I think we have to ensure, and I think this is very important, we have to ensure that no right-wing parties or presidents building walls stop us from being free and stop us helping people who are in need. For me, these are the cities without fear. For the next 2 days, I'd like to wish all of you a great conference, fantastic exchange with old and new friends, new experiences, insights into the absolutely hot topics and the research on smart cities and all around this area, fun also, and friendship. I hope that this is the conference you do love and you do remember for a long time. Thanks again, Gesa, Kent. Now it's up to you. Enjoy the show. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jörg, for these words. I've heard you for the first time giving a greeting note. That was great. Thank you. So our next guest is Katharina Fegebank. She is, where is she? She's here, I think. I heard that she arrived. Yes, Maggie says yes. Katharina is our Minister of Science and Gender Equality here in Hamburg, and she's the Deputy Mayor of the city of Hamburg also. Katharina has been one of our big supporters already right from the beginning. And last year we traveled together to Boston. It was a delegation visit. And I remember that when she entered MIT, Kent, you remember this too, she was super happy, super excited about the whole research atmosphere, about this interdisciplinary approach. And she was super excited and super thrilled about it. And I thank you very much, Katharina, for being here. And the floor is yours. The door opens. Great. Welcome, and thank you for coming.
I just made it. I'm out of breath.
Yeah, but I know that you can.
Your colleagues told me you're all out of breath,
yes.
So I think we'll manage together. So, I have just come from the cabinets meeting this morning. We always have our government's cabinets meetings on Tuesdays, so I'm very happy to be here and to welcome you all. Dear Lord Foster, dear President, where are you all? Over there, okay. Dear Gesa Sima, dear Kent Larsen, hi. Over there. Okay, and dear all, welcome to Hamburg and welcome to this beautiful place. Actually, it's one of the best places in town we have to open this conference, to open the City Science Summit 2019, and it's such a great honor for our city to host the third City Science Summit after Andorra and Shanghai. And of course, I don't see you all, but I heard that around about 400, 500 people here already, and the list of participants, of course, is long, international, and top level, and I can't say to all of you individually hello, but like this, welcome so much to Hamburg, and I'm very much looking forward to sharing some time with you here at Hamburg's really popular landmark, the Elbphilharmonie. You're all members of the City Science Network. your network partners from Boston, from Quito, Buenos Aires, Barcelona, Andorra, Helsinki, Cairo, Dubai, Taipei, Shanghai, Beijing. Wow, that sounds really impressive and amazing. And you're all established experts as high-level CEOs and academics of all career stages. Mayors from various cities around the globe have registered. What a diverse and international group, and that really makes us proud. And once again, a very, very warm welcome, because you all share a passion. We also have the passion for the future of our cities. And today and tomorrow you will have the chance to focus on up-to-date and urgent questions. You will have the opportunity to discuss new approaches, develop new innovative ideas, how urban spaces in international metropolis can develop in the future. And I'm very curious to hear and learn more from your expertise, as our city here in Hamburg is changing at a rapid pace, actually. Just now we are realizing, and we are actually in this area, Europe's biggest urban development project, the HafenCity, around this beautiful concert hall, and other urban projects such as the Science City, not City Science, but Science City Bahrenfeld, which is a district of Hamburg in the western part. They are already in the queue, and more are still to come. So actually we look at science, and I as the minister, we look at science from many different perspectives, but also from the perspective of urban development and urban build, and what contribution science actually can do. And so we are kind of excited to have the first time in Hamburg's history a new quarter, a new district that has been triggered and motivated and pushed by science and by research and by technology transfer, and that is really, really exciting for us. So therefore it is a great honor for our city to host such a visionary summit. And of course, it's a pleasure to have you all here. And before I continue, I would like to give a tremendous thank you to Gesa Ziemer and her team of the CityScienceLab. I spoke to some of them outside, and actually came to some of your colleagues, recognized them from last year. I think you did a fantastic job setting up this conference. It is such a promising program, and I think you will have like fun-filled days of discussions, talks, high-profile keynote speaks, interactive workshops, and other sessions. And of course, tomorrow the general public is invited to. So I would really, really like to give a hand to Gesa for bringing this summit to Hamburg and for making this meeting possible. I think this is spectacular. Thank you so much. And I think we are all aware, and I just mentioned it, that the times for global politics are currently very challenging. I would even dare to say that the times are extremely challenging. And I think we have to look what is happening in the cities, because actually today more than 50% of the population lives in cities, and it is more to come. And I think this is the place where the smart ideas and solutions of tomorrow will happen, to transfer them to the countrysides, and of course to all fields of political sphere. And so it is so fascinating for us to see what is possible when I take a look at the CityScienceLab here in Hamburg. And we met you last year in Boston, and it was such a fascinating experience to see what kind of different fields we actually can use the mechanisms of the CityScienceLab to find solutions for today and for tomorrow. And what we did here in Hamburg 3-4 years ago, when we had the huge wave of refugees coming to Europe, to Germany, and in particular to the cities, with the help of the CityScienceLab here at the HafenCity University, which was introduced after we signed the cooperation contract with you, with the MIT in Boston, was to invite people, the people of Hamburg, to really discuss the mega challenge of housing for refugees. And people realized, oh, I can't just say welcome to everybody and at the same time say it's good to have them, but not anywhere around my place. So people from all walks of life were invited to discuss the issue of refugee housing. And they realized that there is no black and white answer, but they realized there is something in between, and that is political debate and political discussion, and find a consensus and to compromise. And this all helps, besides the technical aspect, to understand how a society works, and I think that is a big, big contribution to democracy. And what we see at the MIT and what we see here at the HafenCity University really paves the way for a new form of understanding, of participation, of people's participation. And we actually want to push that to an even higher level. I don't know whether there are already representatives here from the United Nations and from our foreign ministry, but this afternoon I think it is, we will sign a contract or a letter of intent with the United Nations Technology and Innovation Lab, known as UNTIL, that we have a new form of cooperation for participation processes and finding solutions for cities, and then of course makes us and me very proud that we will have that in Hamburg. Maybe one last remark. Some time ago, Hamburg was mainly a port and trade city, a very proud and a very rich port and trade city. I think Hamburg has developed tremendously over the past years because it is currently transforming into a vibrating science and innovation metropolis, also with the help of our universities, and in particular with the help of the HafenCity University, because what is developed here is not ideas and visions for urban build and architecture and the way cities look like in the future, but what I just said, with the CityScienceLab, we have new forms of participation, of integrating people, of addressing even people that know they have a problem with a certain thing, so we actually include everybody, so we have a good contribution to democracy and a good participation process with this interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary approach of the HafenCity, where science and basic research is being transformed into ideas that help societies to grow. And I want to say thank you for that, because that helps to create acceptance for science and research, and in times of fake news, this is exactly the answer to it. So thank you so much to all our universities here in Hamburg and around the world, and in particular, once again, to the HafenCity University. The motto, I think it's quite a daring motto, cities without, because on my way here I thought, what is cities without politicians and politics? So maybe next time you can do without representatives from the city, and you find your own solutions. But I think it's always a good idea not to keep in touch, but really to exchange and to argue and to find the best solutions. But why not think to be innovative and to try out completely new things? Mobility without cars, economies without currencies. Why not govern our future cities without bureaucrats? Cities without, I think that is a cool motto, and I'm very interested to hear and to find out what kind of solutions you come up with, if you come up with solutions. Sometimes things stay open. So ladies and gentlemen, and dear all, once again, a very warm welcome to you here in Hamburg, and I hope you will have an inspiring conference. You will meet as many new people as possible, because every time you meet new people, new ideas will be generated, and I hope you enjoy your time here. Thank you so much.
So, Katharina, the last time I saw you in Boston, you were pregnant with twins. And now they're 10 months old, so congratulations to the addition to your family. Yeah. So for those of you who follow architecture, Lord Norman Foster needs no introduction. For myself, his firm produced many of the buildings I was looking at a long time ago when I was in architecture school. And most recently, I'm sure everybody knows, the Apple headquarters in California and the Bloomberg European headquarters in London, which some have called the world's most sustainable building. But I've been able to see a different side of Norman over these last few years when we've been working together with Norman and Elena and the Norman Foster Foundation in Madrid, thinking about possibilities in the future for informal settlements. And I have been amazed how curious Norman is and how open to new ideas and how excited he gets when we talk about new possibilities. So it's a great thrill and honor to have Norman here to launch our third annual City Science Summit. Welcome, Norman.
I wanted really to share some experience, insights, and possibilities. And just to say that from the beginning of the practice which has produced the kind of buildings that Kent has been talking about, been advocating a green architecture since 1967. At that time, it was truly radical. It wasn't mainstream. It wasn't even called green architecture. So a few words about sustainability. For me, it's really about working with nature. It's about change and innovation, questioning, challenging. It's a belief in technology, but technology in a benign way as a means to social ends. And in that link between all these issues, memory and history, is a key factor. This is a very recent image, really very direct, self-explanatory. We have to change the way in which we consume, create waste, and move into converting waste to energy in such a way that it's a total cycle. And if that's a recent image, then if I go back in time to the earliest projects in the late 60s, early 1970s, and it's perhaps a reminder that sometimes the unbuilt projects are the most significant. And in this, which was for a shipping company, creator, the headquarters in a forest outside of Oslo in Norway, and touching the ground lightly with a series of pavilions. All the recent mantras of recycling, here we're talking about recycling water, converting human waste into fertilizer, ventilating naturally with cool air from the forest floor, encouraging sunlight, solar collectors. Another unbuilt project at that time for the same shipping company, which operated cruise ships, which returned with produce from the Canary Islands. And this was a regional plan, and one tiny glimpse of that project in many ways says it all. It's about solar collecting. There are batteries underneath the kitchen. It's converting the human waste into fertilizer for agriculture. It's solar stills for creating drinking water from seawater. So in a way, all those ingredients are there in the 1970s. I was very fortunate to engage with Buckminster Fuller and collaborate with him for the last 12 years of his life. And the project that we did together, which was for his family and our family at that time, soon to be interestingly realized as a project, is a totally autonomous house. And that house, the whole house would move, and a shade would move around it to protect it, to harvest the energy. And I've never really made the connection between that and perhaps a more familiar built project in Berlin, the Reichstag. But in a way, all those elements are there. Here it's a beacon on the skyline of democracy at work. And here you can see the reflector, which brings natural light deep into the chamber, reducing the dependency on electricity. And that mirror-like cone also extracts the air as part of a ventilation system. And just like the autonomous house, the solar shield moves around according to the sun. In social terms, the public is on top of the politicians who are answerable to them, one above the other. And it has this energy manifesto which demonstrates that it's possible for a public building to be zero carbon, zero waste, in this instance driven by literally vegetable oil. So that belief in working with nature, buildings which can use air at ambient temperature, reduce energy, and create a healthier environment. The very first example of that was a centre for the arts in East Anglia, the Sainsbury Centre, our first breathing building, no reliance on refrigeration, and a very, very literally cool climate. And pioneering, interestingly, here in Germany with Commerzbank, the bank on the left, which was the first naturally ventilated, nonetheless a controlled climate, augmented, but for 70% of the year, literally working with the air. And that developed over the Swiss Re in London and the Hearst Tower in New York. And if I move from the urbanity of New York to Silicon Valley, and perhaps look at this project in a little more detail, how does one reconcile this image of Silicon Valley with the first meeting with Steve Jobs, where he describes this as the fruit bowl of America in his youth, and with an awareness that one of Steve's kind of extraordinary abilities was always a meeting was a walk, and ideally a walk in the country. So how could one translate that in terms of a project? And this was the site, and the statistics of that site, and here we see the superimposition of the very familiar circle of a building. The key statistics, I guess, at the bottom there is that half of that site is covered in asphalt, and there's very little landscaping. And in its final transformation, there's virtually no tarmac, and everything is about the landscape. Now, the interesting thing about this image is also 30% more people on that site. And what appears to be a very large building, and physically it most certainly is, but you have to compare this with a multiplicity of individual buildings. And you don't get the scale from this aerial view. If I was to put you into the heart of that circle, then the building becomes a kind of horizon. And here you see the recreation of that California landscape. If you move outside of that circle to the landscape, the other side of the ring, then it becomes very much an incident in the landscape. It's not the only building. There is the Steve Jobs Theatre, and the Steve Jobs Theatre is almost like a kind of flying saucer in the landscape. It's quite massive, that roof. It's about 80 tons, and it literally sits on a glass wall, a glass curtain, and in the joints between the glass, the services, the electricity is almost invisibly fed up. So that's a kind of celebration of space, of liberation, with this structural circle of glass around it. That same use of reflective glass to kind of harmonize with nature, these eyebrows are in part of the facade providing shading, but they're also bouncing light deep into the heart of the building. And that external wall virtually disappears. And here you can see the underside of that, which is reflecting that landscape and bringing it in. If I talk about the fusion of the social dimension and also the technology and the quest for a healthier building, then at the top of that sheet of glass Here we see the junction, and you start to see the movement of air, and that controls the flow of air. There are also filters in terms of dust or insects, although it's a very extraordinary, benign California climate. So working with that climate. A lot of the things over the period that I'm describing here, which is some 50 years or a little more, been driven by the very subjective idea that if you have a relationship to nature, if you have natural light, if you have a good view, if you have a changing climate which changes with the seasons, then it will be healthier. But that's always been very subjective until 2016. And here you see the test bed that enabled the Harvard School of Public Health to quantify the benefits of a green building, a normal building, or a super green building. And what the people at the upper level who were doing various kinds of tests, mental tests and so on, didn't know is that the plant room below was changing the environment to simulate the conditions of these different buildings. And here, in a nutshell, are some of those findings, but the three kind of critical peaks: crisis response, use of information, and processing that for strategy, scientifically proves something which over many decades was very subjective. If I talk about those qualities in a building, it's arguably much easier to do that in a rural area of California, much more difficult in the heart of a kind of throbbing capital city. And this is the Bloomberg headquarters. And those fins are the gills which enable the building to breathe. So they filter, they attenuate the sound, so it's very quiet inside, although it's quite noisy outside. This is a cross-section through the building, and you can see that the movement of air is concentrated with the vertical movement of pedestrians within this building and the way in which natural light can come above. So again, it's a very holistic way of bringing these often completing challenges together. The vortex starts at the ground floor and then it spirals up into what is called the pantry. So socially, everybody has to come here before they go to their actual floor of workplace. So this is the kind of social hub. And I just want to have a few words about innovation. You'll see that there is a hardwood floor there. How do you reconcile the idea of a hardwood floor with technology where you want access immediately to wiring? And how can that work in an office environment where normally you would have carpet? The answer is the ceiling, and the ceiling is doing many different jobs. The floor, incidentally, was an invention of ours, and that is the wood, the hardwood, has a magnetic layer, and that enables it to cling to the full access floor below. So it's total flexibility. And acoustically, that is possible because of the ceiling. And the ceiling has 2.5 million of these little petals, and 50,000 of those has a little LED. And chilled and warm water can pulse through that ceiling, so it's working acoustically. It's part of the heating, cooling. It's modifying those times when it's too cold outside or too hot, and you want to modify that climate in a controlled and energy-efficient way. And we conducted research with our own engineers and created this laboratory to test that. And these little pillars are simulating and monitoring their people at a desk. So the research was really quite a key element. And that's really just one glimpse of a belief in research. If you go to a bathroom in this building, it will look completely normal. What you will not know is that it's using a system that was patented and which is in use in every airliner that's currently flying in the world. It's a vacuum system. So it operates on a fraction of the amount of water. The water's harvested and it's totally recycled. And as Kent said, so far this building has achieved the highest rating for sustainability of any building so far built. That interest in aviation, and as a kind of aviator, passionate pilot, interested in all things about aviation and curious about locomotives, transportation, and so on, then we had the opportunity with our first airport, London's third airport, to question this model. If you transport yourself back into the 1990s, the end of the 20th century, this was a typical terminal. And if you looked up, it was full of services, ducts, moving air, roof-mounted plant, mechanical plant that would service that. And because it was dark, you'd need lots of electric light generating heat. So the radical move here in a sustainable direction and a humanistic direction was literally to turn that upside down. All that heavy equipment would go below the concourse, would feed from below. So you had 24 hours, 7 days, every day of the year access to it. And you would get the benefits of natural light and the energy savings that would come from it. We developed that model. It became a model for other architects, planners. It's an established model. And most recently, we started with the opportunity for a competition for International Airport, Mexico City, to see if we could push this idea further forward. So here, in that image, you'll see a curved roof and you'll see vertical glass walls. What if you could have a skin that would encompass the links to the aircraft, the windows, and by taking that approach, you could create bigger spans. You could create far more interesting space. So that leaps from 36 meters to 170 meters. And that continuous skin then becomes, as I described it, the expression of the building. To explain this concept to the jury, I made, with my colleagues, a small film. And it was really to convey a centuries-old idea. Before architects became involved in buildings, what were people doing at a very basic building level, mostly around the Mediterranean, the so-called Catalan vault. And that is that if you hold a piece of rope, then under compression, it will describe a very beautiful, very, very efficient curve. And if you could freeze that and you turn it the other way, then it becomes the perfect tensile structure. And going back in time with that knowledge and working with several universities and students using very basic materials, earth, but with a high-tech additive, we created a prototype drone port, which has since become a permanent pavilion in Venice. And here you can see the group of us, the students, realizing that. And it's a reminder, perhaps, that if we want to look far ahead to the future, then perhaps first we should look far back and learn from history. The application of that line of thought to creating a series of experiments in the desert on the fringe of Abu Dhabi for a research facility, a small university, the start of a larger community to explore renewable energies, Masdar. But first, we wanted to learn how, before an age of cheap energy, how a community living in the desert could transform a very hostile environment into a very elegant, livable habitation. And here, if you take the kind of cuts as you move from the desert, scorching heat, then as you get into the public spaces of that city that I showed in the desert, you'll see that the temperature drops as a result of orientation, shade. If you go into a courtyard, then by evaporative cooling, the temperature comes down further. Finally, you go inside the home, and because of the massive insulation It's cool without any refrigeration. So if we applied those lessons as we did in Masdar, then we start to create spaces which are habitable, which are benign, notwithstanding the fact that the temperature in the center, Western style, is totally unbearable unless you're inside an air-conditioned car. And then we move across and we see the student accommodation and we see the university labs, the two principles of expression. And here is the public space at Masdar. What you don't see is below there, and this is going back now nearly 10 years, is we're seeing robot cars, we're seeing induction charging of those cars, and we're seeing all the servicing that makes possible at that upper level, which is also elevated, so it's taking advantage of the cooler desert breezes just above the floor of the desert. So again, working holistically. And that really driven by some 40% of the power generated by this 10 megawatt solar array. It's not to suggest that renewables offer a future in terms of countering emissions, greenhouse gases. Energy and industry, the production of energy and industry is the major generator of those greenhouse gases. Buildings and the connections between them, the mobility between them, 20%, and agriculture a significant 24%. So if we're to look at the implications of the melting polar regions and the effects that that could have, given that 75% of the world's cities are on the coast and 50% of the population within 100 kilometers of that, and we pull back and we see a satellite image of those cities, then, as had been noted earlier, the future, our future, is the reality is it's global cities. And although they consume 70% of the energy and are responsible so far for 70% of the emissions, which has to be addressed, the reality is that they are also the generators of wealth. A typical city can generate as much wealth as a country. So New York generates the equivalent GDP of the whole of Canada. If you take London, it's the equivalent of the Netherlands. If you take a port city like Osaka, it's the equivalent of the GDP of Switzerland. And it's also worth noting that 1 in 8 currently live in slums. What does that mean? It means that a significant part of the world in this image of one city, South America, Sao Paulo, has access to everything that those on the other side don't have. In other words, they don't have adequate shelter, they don't have clean water, modern sanitation, or access to power. Access to power is arguably the key to so many things. And we're talking here of something like 14%, over 1 billion people. And this kind of glimpse of illegal connections to power and the fire hazards of that in terms of kind of shanty construction. And the next, this is really, in a nutshell, saying that those societies which have access to power are right up there. Essentially, it's Japan, America, it's Europe. And those societies further down, interestingly, which don't have access to power, don't have the same, and it's obvious, life expectancy, infant mortality, enlightenment, and significantly, right at the bottom, those are the war zones. The war zones are those places that don't have access to power. There is an inevitable link. And if we're talking about a population which by 2050 is estimated to move from 7.5 billion to 10 billion, and 70% of that will be urban, then you're looking the potential for 1 in 3 to be in those slum conditions. To put that into perspective, the idea that you question the current strategy in terms of how you address slums. Our proposition was really almost naively simple, and that is that the current strategy, in the absence of the involvement of those professions concerned with design, the political mantra is you bulldoze them and start again, which has not worked. And the scale of this issue is so large that it's never going to work. The other idea is that the slum is a place of despair and not a place of hope. And it was quite interesting, the insights from one project in India, Dharavi, and just to put Dharavi, where we started to get an insight into some of these issues with a small team. If you can imagine a site which is half the area of Central Park and has 2/3 of the population of Manhattan. Manhattan is 1.6 million, and this site here in Dharavi, and that's the same outline, is 1 million people. And that view cone there is pointing towards some new buildings. The new buildings were in an area which had been bulldozed, and new buildings, as an answer, you can see ring there, those new buildings in the background. And the team exploring that, looking at the bulldozed site and the recreated 14-story buildings, these are the only buildings which have modern sanitation. And they were completely empty, abandoned, unused. The space at the bottom was used for cricket by the children in the community. And here you can see the team ringed, and they're having tea with the community leaders, and they're asking the question, I mean, those buildings are empty, the site was bulldozed, why are they not in use? And the answer was discovered just through seeing the economy and the needs, the physical needs of that community, who essentially process something like 80% of the waste of Mumbai. And the kind of accommodation that they need is essentially layered. It could not work. They could not sustain economically their life in those new buildings. So the idea that this is a poor community most certainly is, but if you relate it back to the agricultural community from which they fled, then it's moving into an area of affluence. And there are all kinds of side stories on this, the way in which they bring together teachers from the state system and essentially create a private form of education. And you see kids immaculately dressed with ties, and really quite extraordinary. So that led to the proposition that if you reduced at key points the density, you could thread an infrastructure of services, and you could regenerate those communities from within. It's at this point, relatively recently, and this is going back about a little over a year, and coming together here around this table in the foundation. And the foundation is in every sense completely separate from the practice. So I'm really wearing two hats. I'm the common denominator between the work of the foundation, which generates out globally from Madrid, and the headquarters of the practice, which is in London. So they're separate in every sense. And this, around the table, is the coming together with MIT to look at some of these issues and the application longer term of technology. And along the way, this was one proposition that I made to reduce the energy demands, a heart unit, which was generated by the needs of a slum, but like anything that would address the issues of a slum, would have a spin-off into the formal city, so would improve the quality of life. So, for example, if you could compress, if all the elements in a house, the heating, the cooling, the refrigerator, the bathroom, the storage, if those could holistically talk to each other and compress into a much smaller unit, then whether that was addressing the issue in a slum or creating more affordable housing or creating in luxury housing terms less space occupied by certain elements. And in that proposition, I invoked in India, the technology of what was then the most affordable car at the time. This is going back some years. It's Tata Nano. And I met Ratan Tata, one of the key family members behind this great kind of manufacturing empire in India. And I shared these ideas for his opinion, and he was totally supportive. And I said something like, what if we could try on a pilot project? How could you help? And he said, well, first you need a smaller slum, so you could work more directly with a group. And also, you would need to find a community which had a sympathetic civic leader, a politician who really believed in it. It wasn't corrupt. And so that was a very nice meeting. And the foundation is meanwhile working on these issues. And then it's must have been about after that meeting, 2 years, 3 years, and I got a phone call from Ratan Tata, and he said, I shared your ideas with a politician who's the chief minister of one of the poorest states in India. Odisha has a major slum project. He was totally enthusiastic. What's followed from that is the land rights to slum dwellers, which enables them then to start with a bank loan and so on. So he said, there's a big ceremony handing out certificates in 3 weeks' time. Can you come? And this was last year. And so that led to this meeting here. On the right-hand side is the newspaper of that time, which is the theme of the proposition, that instead of evicting and bulldozing, you empower them and you regenerate from within. And there's the Chief Minister, Ratan Tata, in the center, and myself. And we started with a slum community, Sahibaba, in Odisha. And we met with the community, and the community, to our surprise, had prepared a presentation. In the foreground is a drone photograph of their community, and in that sense, the drone technology made possible the mapping. In the background is something that they prepared. In the foreground, in the back of that image, there's a swamp. You won't recognize it. But they produced their vision map. And this, fascinating, when we questioned and challenged them on this, it's just a really serious piece of design. For example, in the heart of it, they wanted a cyclone shelter. And the premise was, if we had a cyclone shelter, then we wouldn't have to leave our community in the event of a cyclone. We would be here in place to guard our property. And I said something like this: landscaping at the bottom here, around the... Oh yes, if we increase the landscaping there, then that's the direction that the storms come from. So it would modify our climate. And at the top is a playground. They said, of course, if you drained the swamp there, then we would have space. So, and at this point I said, who are the architects? And these are the architects. And amazing piece of design. That led on to a number of projects. These are really early days. We haven't been active on these projects now, not for a year, almost a year. So we're looking at another settlement called Neues Sahi, and that is just a few facts about the extreme weather there and the effects of that weather on the kind of structures and the way in which a more robust structure has withstood that cyclone. I should say that all the images I'm showing here are taken by our team. We have a team which is now resident there, working with these communities and liaising with the project group in the foundation in Madrid with a kind of backwards and forwards movement. We sent questionnaires out in advance of our visits to these different communities. And interestingly, the one on the left is, what would you like your community have? The one on the right is, what would you like your family to have? And out of these various questionnaires, the first thing is a roof that doesn't leak. The second are the walls. In terms of the community, it's about water first. And in another survey, once they got past this, the next stage was what's next, and that's a job and education. So it's been a fascinating insight. This is the aerial view of this community on the water with the beach. And if you can see again, this community, like the first one, has a swamp at the back. And that gave the clue, if you drained it, for the way in which you could reduce the density, manipulate, create a degree of public space and address some of the major issues in this community. Trying to condense 1 year into a few minutes, the idea is to produce a scalable model, something that we can document. The clues were given from that first community where they were using a vision map. So visually literate and able in a very sophisticated way to understand two-dimensionally major design issues. And so as a pilot project which would enable others, producing a manual films, enable others to spread the effect of these studies, and working with the different groups individually. And finally, that is the master plan. And what happens is you can see that the swamp has become reclaimed land, and there are very, very clearly defined routes. And each of those different groups, and the women, again, were very, very powerful in terms of design and involvement. And they were responsible for the crossroutes which would deliver security and access to a far wider range of homes. Here you can see, recognizably in the background, the master plan. And the next image is the approval of that master plan. Work on the ground has started, but it is somewhat painful in a way, because coming to the premise of what Kent was summarizing, you realize the inadequacy in these conditions of the mega grid, the big power station, the massive amount of excavation with pipes. This is the start of a toilet block in that community, a part of the master plan, now under construction. And leads to the proposition of what if in a community like this you could be autonomous, you could plant a box, deliver power. And as a reminder, there's probably right now, moving up to 200 million people on this planet who are not served by any kind of heavy infrastructure. They may be on a train, they may be in a cruise liner, or they're in an aircraft. So there's a global population on the move, unconnected. What lessons could we learn from space? There have been very interesting initiatives derived from space. The Gates Foundation has been working on this. Power is a key element. It's not possible in the density and whether it's the density of a slum or the desirable high density of a formal city as we know it here, it's not possible to have the surface area for solar cells. And what about the mobility revolution? Right now, the amount of road that was devoted to highways in the 60s and 70s is being ripped up, changing to greenery, whether that's the Big Dig in Boston in America, whether it's in Seoul in Asia, whether it's in Madrid in Europe. What happens to those parking structures when vehicles are moving autonomously, pretty continuously, on call through our cell phone? Ownership has become something that's very perhaps marginal, and is mobility three-dimensional. And so what are the examples which might demonstrate, as Bucky would advocate, the power and the importance of higher performance, doing more with less, and striving to have a higher quality of life, not just for those who are dispossessed, but for everybody alike? More with less. Urban farming has been demonstrated already to produce produce which is more flavorful, delicious, uses a fraction of the water. And would urban farming lead to a greener, quieter, cleaner city? A market embedded in the heart of a city. What lessons might we gain from insights into innovation in the world of medicine? Many of us, myself, have experienced an MRI, a huge piece of equipment, and you move into it. It weighs a huge amount, it costs millions and millions, occupies a lot of space, is unaffordable for screening, say, for breast cancer. The foundation is interested in innovation and really anxious to learn, and we were addressed by this lady, Mary Lou Jepson, extraordinary lady who has created and is about to go on the market, something which is 1 million times more effective than that MRI that I showed. It's a fabric. It could be the dress that she's wearing. Another example of perhaps doing more with less, and again, the computer which we take for granted. In the 40s, it was occupying a mega room. Then there was enormous breakthrough. It's actually mobile on 4 wheels. A few decades later. We now take for granted it's something we can put in our briefcase. And if you look at all these things around the edge, then some of them have become totally obsolete, like the typewriter. It's an antique. My kids have never seen a typewriter until I bought one for them. And whether it's the camera, the torch, the calculator, being transformed by one handheld device. So if we applied, and power, I only recently discovered through some of the researches that we've been doing with MIT that in the 1960s and up there still are satellites which are nuclear powered, miniaturized. This is something from a meeting that took place at MIT with a group, and it's literally delivering power in a container. If the hopeful future is fusion, then fission in its new form, notwithstanding all the prejudices against the power stations, but it's a way of thinking. It's interesting that when you talk to groups who can deliver power up to 20 megawatts in a container, and you talk about the potential of maybe it's a box, so it's not serving a community, it's just below the surface and it's servicing a house. It never ever occurs to them to question the grid because it comes as a prior assumption. So a power station in everybody's mind has to be mega. It has to be the size or twice or 3 times the size of this building. So autonomy is mentally something that is out there, out in the Arctic, or if it's Canada, it's somewhere in the wilds. What if in parallel with that, you were talking about, and this is a serious project with MIT, the idea that you can genetically modify to produce a tree which during the day harvests energy, and at night it glows, and it's street lighting. So your street lighting is an avenue of trees. What if you plant a seed to grow a building? This is nature doing that and creating a bridge. But what if you were to plant a seed in the sense that we are all grown from seeds like the trees? So It leads to the manifesto, which comes full circle back to Kent. Questioning power without grids, sanitation without sewers, meat without animals, mobility without autos, food without soil, and buildings without construction. The start of the conference. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Lord Norman Foster, for this lecture. Thank you for giving us so many insights to your work. And I think we will refer to what you said several times during today and also the day tomorrow. Thank you very much for coming. We will have a short break now. You should be back at 2 o'clock. Please, punctual. Oh, great. Yeah, perfect. Okay. Can we start? Okay, welcome back. Now we will start with the second part of our day, with the lightning talks. Lightning talks will mean that it is a 4-minute talk. It's very short. And the people we invited for the talks, they are very different. So we have people like PhD candidates. Sometimes they are master students. They are researchers from our lab. And some of them are new. They are not so close to our network. And we invited them because we found them interesting. We discovered them. And we would like to, as we would like to extend our network, so we also have some guests here. And I hand over again to you, Kent, now, because you would like to give a short talk about the cities without issue from your perspective.
Thank you. Okay, so when I told everyone that, because we had a lot of people who wanted to speak, we decided just to do very short lightning talks. And lightning talks are very hard to do. It's much harder to do a 4-minute talk than a 20 or 30-minute talk. And they said, okay, but you have to do the first one. So I'm going to launch this, and we'll see how it goes. And I'm very excited about this because it's a way of getting lots of ideas and information out into the world in a very concise way. Okay, so if you could start the, and by the way, they're all on auto timers. That's great. Okay. Here we go. So we live in an era of extreme urbanization and accelerating climate change. We also live in an era of increasingly dysfunctional national governments. And it's clear to me that the real change will take place when local communities act, and particularly when young people who will inherit this future are empowered to take action. I was so inspired that over the last week or so, millions of young people took to the streets. They're incredibly impatient with the lack of progress that's happening at the national level. So if we start locally, this is our backyard. This is Kendall Square. It's considered one of the great innovation districts on the planet, but it's not a functioning community. There's no grocery store or pharmacy, there's very little housing, and we have been thinking about how we can turn this innovation district into an innovation community. So these graphs here kind of show the performance. Very high density employment, high diversity employment, extremely low density residential, even lower diversity when it comes to residential. It's only a few apartments for rich people, basically. And as a result, third places, cafes, restaurants collapse at night because nobody lives there. So MIT is now developing a 14-acre site just to the north of that video. And it's the last great opportunity to turn MIT into this innovation community. This is based on the MIT Transportation Survey. 4,000 people commute in and out to MIT. And they generate roughly 3 tons of carbon per person per year, we calculate. Now, if everybody drove an electric vehicle, that goes down to 2.19. That's not a bad improvement. But as a thought experiment, we thought, what if everybody could actually live on that new site and walk to work? So that reduces to 0.5 tons, a 6-fold improvement. I guarantee there's no other way through technology to get a 6-fold improvement in the environmental performance of that community. So we've built a Cityscope platform to model these communities, this one of Kendall Square, and we start by voxelating the city. So we basically divide it up into a 3-dimensional grid. We can define the demographic profiles and the density and the activities of people is similar to what we use for computational fluid dynamics. And then the process of looking at scenarios is interactive. We can dynamically explore changes in land use and density and new mobility systems, et cetera. So the first thing we want to do is increase the density, but density without congestion, because communities oppose density because it often leads to traffic and parking problems. So here you can see us dynamically exploring changes in density and diversity and updating this radar plot in real time. Harmony without zoning, this is key, because market forces alone will not lead to a functioning community. So we're looking at algorithmic land use, for example. You might start with a base density. Luxury housing, corporate labs gives no increase. But we could map actually hundreds of incentives to increase development rights, to build different types of housing, workforce, elderly housing, family housing, et cetera. And this can all be dynamic, and they update as economic and social and technology changes occur to create a kind of civic homeostasis, like Norman said, looking backwards. In this case, looking backwards to where communities were vibrant, live, work, play, shop places. We also need to think about a future with mobility but without cars. Michael Lynn will talk about this in a minute. There are many ways to do that, many mobility modes. This is a very lightweight Uber-like system that comes to you wherever you are, and we can begin to model these kinds of systems. So here you see the roads that are red because we've increased the density too much, but then we toggle on lightweight autonomous modes, the roads go green, we can increase the density and find that kind of civic homeostasis. Housing without rooms. Housing is a critical issue in many of these communities. In fact, Mayor Bloomberg of New York said affordable housing was necessary for young people in order to stay economically and culturally competitive. So in this case, young woman wakes up in the morning, she fixes coffee, and the room changes dynamically to a living room. So I think we need to get rid of two things in cities: dedicated parking spaces and bedrooms. Now we can begin to model some of this with Cityscope. So in this case, we're mapping 300 square foot micro units to a Lego brick. And then over time, altogether, we can see the impact on this community: density without zoning, order without zoning, density without congestion, mobility without cars. And you can see the CO2 dropping, social performance increasing because you're creating a more vibrant community where people can exchange ideas and leading to a high-functioning innovation community. We think it's possible to get it to a 10x decrease in CO2 and a 10x increase in social performance. And we owe it to these children to find ways to empower them to address these challenges in their own local community. Thank you. Okay, so I'd like to ask Gabriella to join me. Where's Gabby? Here she comes. Hi, Gabby. So Gabby is one of my master's students. She's an amazing designer. She's working with all kinds of electronics and amazing things. Now, she volunteered to do the graphics for this show. This is, if you saw the cities without, it was her idea to cut off the without and make it incomplete. So, and if you look around at the posters, these are all Gabby's posters. Anyway, rather than doing a 4-minute lightning talk, Gabby broke the rules. We like people that break the rules in creative ways. She said, why don't I do 3 short videos to introduce each of the 3 sections for the conference? I have not seen these videos. So, Gabby, why don't you tell us what you were thinking?
Yes, so when I first heard the name of the summit about a year ago, I was immediately very intrigued and also very attracted to it, because cities without what? It's this incomplete statement. You almost have the need to fill in the blank with another word, but actually that's it. It's without. It doesn't need more than that. So what you're about to see now is my reaction and also a praise to a permanent state of incompleteness, soundtrack by Holger Prang. Enjoy.
Okay, so that was Gabby's introduction to this grouping of talks, which is our physical track. So we'd like to move on to one of the withouts that Norman mentioned, I also mentioned, that's mobility without cars. So Michael Lin is a PhD student in my group from Taiwan. He's developed a whole series of lightweight mobility modes. Some years ago, I think it was almost 10 years ago, he did the Green Wheel, this hub motor with battery and electronics that would allow you to retrofit a conventional bicycle. He did a robo-scooter that folded to occupy very little space, connect to a bike share dock, and he's now working on our newest project called the PEV, the Persuasive Electric Vehicle. We just developed a brand new version of it a few months ago. So Michael Lin, Mobility Without.
Good afternoon. My name is Michael. Nervous. So auto-centric development and private car ownership is unsustainable for our future city. It is crucial that we find alternative solutions. So this is congestion in China. And then traffic congestion and last mile problem. Currently, there are two trends that's fighting with this problem. Ride sharing, which is on demand, convenient, and bike sharing, which is flexible and affordable. What we're doing at MIT is bring together the best of both systems when we present the persuasive electric vehicle. So this is the first time we're showing this video. And then, so PEV is a lightweight autonomous vehicle that's designed for shared use. It delivers package and also transport people. So the user experience of using PEV, you can use your app and drop a pin on the map, and PEV will arrive shortly. When the passenger is on the PEV works as an electric tricycle. So it's very normal and intuitive that you can ride. But on the other hand, when you're riding PEV on the park, met your friend, you can actually get off the vehicle and switch to an e-donkey mode where the PEV will follow you and carry your grocery, where you can have conversation with your friend. PEV, it has a sophisticated human-machine interface where the researchers at MIT could explore not only the self-driving technology, but also the social interface and how these low-speed robots can work in the low-speed environment, such as giving an eye. And then so we're hoping that in the future, we can see this vehicle, we can use these vehicles on your campus or in the closed environment and transporting you from point A to point B. This is a bit longer, but it's coming up. So this is academia and research collaboration between MIT, Denso, and also Taipei Tech. With the support from the Taipei Tech and the students, we work very closely to bring this vehicle to life. But before I talk about the next journey of the PEV research, I would like to recap a couple of important prototypes in the past. So in 2016 CES, we demonstrated this concept vehicle. The idea is that the future self-driving car could be friendly and it could be lightweight.
Logically, then, we designed more of a bike-like vehicle that was legal in bike lanes.
So can we turn off the music? Thank you. And then, so this is the engineering prototype. After a few months working, we launched this engineering prototype. This prototype allows the users to quickly hack and experiment different ideas. Next slide, please. All right, and then so this is a living lab experiment that we like to run in Taipei. This experiment, putting our research in the real world, allowed the researcher to understand better how this vehicle could work in the low-speed environment. It also helped us to validate and optimize our system. Next slide. Sorry about this hiccup. So together, so basically this is a new refined prototype based on the previous testing results. So we package and we identify the practical systems and put it into a modularized architecture. And then in collaboration with Denso, we're also exploring like the thermal seat, and then ice cream delivering for the code delivering, and also facial recognition for user authentication. And right now, we're working on this $1,000 PEV platform where we're hoping to democratize the mobility, and we want to invite our network and our friends in the network to join our future research journey. So this is like 0 to 1, so we provide the 0 to 1. At MIT, we treasure the sharing of knowledge, and we like to build ideas on top of each other. And we're hoping that one day we can turn this research into a movement where people around the world, from different parts of the world, they have the tool and the knowledge to build your own self-driving car. Thank you.
Okay, Guadalupe Babbio, she's a master's student from Spain, also in the City Science group. She has been working with us on the Settlements Without project that we've been exploring with Norman and the foundation. And she's primarily interested in how high-performance, ultimately autonomous systems can provide new services to people in these informal settlements. She'll talk about just one aspect of that in this short 4-minute talk. Guadalupe Babbio, sanitation without sewers.
There are more than 7 billion people in the world. 20% of this population don't have proper access to sanitation, which means that 1.8 billion people don't have access to toilets or latrines. If we look at 2030 and we keep the same way, there will be more than 2 billion people without access to sanitation, a number that should be 0. Most of these people are located in developing countries, are informal settlement dwellers or live in rural areas. For example, South Sudan only has 6% of proper access to sanitation. Open defecation and hanging pit latrines transfer disease, such as cholera or diarrhea, that happens when people is in direct contact with feces, or indirectly via food contamination or soil contamination. These affect directly to the human well-being and to the social and economic development. So we might think, why don't we bring the traditional infrastructure of the Western world? This is the power plant, wastewater power plant of Boston, which brings hygienically and quickly the waste away from our homes. They are collected and transferred to this place, which goes through a tedious process to end up dumping the effluent 15 kilometers away from the shore. So we have spent millions of dollars to create the sewers lines, to build the infrastructure, to maintain, to see signals like this along the Charles River. So this centralized infrastructure won't be able to serve in developing rapid urbanization areas. So that's why my team and me, we have been researching into the centralized solution that we have booked in our toolkit. These solutions don't rely in old-fashioned centralized solutions. And this is what Bill Gates and his foundation has been doing with a unique device of a scale of a toilet that doesn't rely on water supply and on sewers. This device separates fluids from the waste and then burns the waste. And then with the fluids gets separated and storage for another uses. Another technology is what NASA is researching about. They recycle human urine, and it can be used for food purposes, for drink, or for hygiene. They have also been working with Penn State with some microbes that can take human waste and transform it into something edible. Another research team from Cape Town has been working with some bacteria that create a certain enzyme that can break down urea. This, joined with certain molecules and carbon dioxide, can create material construction like this brick at a room temperature. Another group of designers have came up with a toilet for a scale community that can be delivered to remote areas and can be 3D printed. And they also transform waste into electricity. These are some of the solutions of the grid that can be used for these rapid urbanization areas, but they can also bring back to Western places. Because only in the US, there is more than 600,000 miles of sewage lines, which has an average of 33 years old, and which take billions of dollars and a lot of years to be replaced. So why don't we give a better use to this money? Because we know what is our goal, although we might not know how to do it. But we know that this is our priority, a world without a lack of access to sanitation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Guara.
Please join us. Okay. Please join us tomorrow in the informal workshop.
That's great.
Yeah. Thank you.
So Don Ingber, he's the founding director of the Wyss Institute for Biologically Inspired Engineering at Harvard University. His institute is responsible for something like 25% of the patents that are generated at Harvard. Now, Don couldn't fly here today for a 4-minute talk. He's a busy man. But I sat with him in my lab last week, and we did a short interview and turned it into a 4-minute video. So this is Don Ingber, Materials Without Boundaries.
They're not synced. The audio was not synced.
The goal is to develop materials that are totally seamlessly integrated with the natural world. They came from the natural world, they're inspired by the natural world, and they can degrade into fertilizer at the end, for example, or if it's in the medical world, they're totally biocompatible. So that is clearly a goal with biologically inspired engineering. Not only the materials, but the manufacturing process to make them. Yeah. So you're not using, come up with ways you're not using harsh chemicals and that we're going to be left with in the environment forever. There are a lot of large-scale water purification systems that require lots of energy. They're incredibly expensive. They're huge. But we were trying to think, how can you democratize this and get it out to the people to have things that are inexpensive, can be used virtually anywhere. And we use miniaturized fluidic systems that are small channels, almost like capillaries in our body, that use electric charge to very quickly sterilize water, and it could be even turbid water, which is a big problem for most filtration systems. And that's something that we'd like to see in villages anywhere in the world. Right now it requires some energy. It could eventually use solar, but if there's a car in the community, you probably could use a car battery and make enough water to keep you going for a long time. The only way you're going to address that big a problem, I think, is with multifunctional materials. Yeah. And this is what living materials are. I mean, the same materials provide structure, mechanical support, electrical conduction, fluid control, water processing, filtration, etc. And so that's where bioinspiration can really pay off. There's a technology that came out of the Wyss Institute that harnesses electricity from changes in humidity by taking advantage of the fact that bacterial spores that can be in soil dry for hundreds or thousands of years, and when you add water, they come alive again. When they come alive, it's like a grape that's wrinkled when it's dry, and it swells when it's wet, and that has a huge power density, and that actually can drive changes in materials that could generate electricity. And so the idea is that you could basically put things on top of reservoirs to prevent evaporation, but as water evaporates through, it could cause this swelling, create a cycling structure to generate electricity. I think simple out-of-the-box things like that are going to have to be the solution. How to get there, it's a big challenge. We need support from around the world to make that kind of thing happen. It's not going to come from conventional energy industry. Living creatures can respond, plants respond to light, grow towards it. Creatures can sense oxygen, nutrients, and they literally change the way they move and grow. And so you can actually design materials that do the same thing. And I think that's the beginning of, houses that actually truly adapt to their environment in real time. I'm not sure if we'll be able to grow a lamppost, but we probably can grow a pole upon which there may be living bacteria or yeast that are expressing materials that generate light like a firefly. I think that's a possibility. It may not all be in one smooth process, but growing light bulbs, I think, is definitely possible. Growing lamp posts, I think, would be possible. We just have to figure out how to do it all together. It all depends on what the dream is and what the challenge is, and you get really creative people together and amazing things happen. So it is important to define big challenges, but then you got to get in the trenches and say, how do we start now to get there 30 years from now? And often it doesn't take 30 years. That's what we find.
Okay, I think there should be a video by Gabi now, is it right? Or otherwise I introduce the next speakers.
Yep.
This was Gabi's video again, and we are now in the next section, and the title of this section is Process. First we did physical, now it's process. I am introducing two architects, Ariel Neumann and Jörg Nönnich. They will do the performance together because we would like to show how we work together, MIT Media Lab and CityScienceLab in Hamburg. Ariel Neumann is an architect and he's a researcher at MIT Media Lab. They both, Jörg and Ariel, they don't design houses anymore. They went more into data science. So Ariel is responsible for the development of the cityscopes at MIT Media Lab, and he's also one of the main coordinators of the City Science Network. So thanks to Ariel, we are all here. He's also a PhD candidate, and he studied architecture at MIT and also in Jerusalem. Jörg Nönnich, he's my very, very close colleague at the City Science Lab in Hamburg. He's holding the professorship Digital City Science. Jörg was trained as an architect from Bauhaus University in Weimar and Waseda University in Tokyo. So he's also an expert on Japanese architecture. Jörg is internationally well connected. We are working together with the GIZ, the Agency for International Cooperation. So at the moment, he's also setting up projects for India and Ecuador. But now, Ariel and Jörg, they would like to show how we work together. They would like to show some projects that we did here in Hamburg. The floor is yours.
So Jörg, how do we do that order without planning?
You need smart tools and you need corporations, good corporations.
Okay.
In 2015, the first cooperation contract was signed between HafenCity University, between the MIT Media Lab and the city of Hamburg. And we had plenty of challenges right at the front door. Building the HafenCity, Europe's biggest urban construction project, admittedly a challenge of a rich northern city, but pre-designing the Olympic facilities on the Grasbrook just around the corner, that was a big issue and that needed special approaches, Ariel, I guess.
I mean, just to show you how dedicated we are to these projects, here is Kent jumping over the fence in the Grasbrook site in order to get a better view of the site. This is how we do things at MIT. But of course, everything sort of changed toward the end of 2015 when the city of Hamburg, its residents, is of course government, realized that nearly 80,000 refugees are projected to arrive to the city by the end of that year. These are 500 people every day in the trains, in the buses, looking for a place to restart their life, and the city had to find out a solution for that. These were the conditions they were granted at the time. This is better than what they had on the way from the Middle East and North Africa, but it's not something you can sustain for more than 2 or 3 weeks. So by the end of 2015, the mayor of Hamburg gets a slap on the wrist by the local opposition telling him, you are not to pursue that Olympic Games. What you need to focus on now is really that refugee problem. 2 weeks after, he shows up unattended in our lab at the CityScienceLab here at HafenCity University, gives us 3 months, very short budget, and tells us you guys have to come up with a solution for that refugee problem. Now, this is the CityScienceLab in January 2016. Everybody in this picture is the lab. We just established, we literally hang the sign. But that was really an extreme situation that under the amazing leadership of Professor Geza Zimmer and the amazing team here at HafenCity University, we copy-pasted everything we know about Cityscope from MIT here to the city of Hamburg, and with German precision, exactly 3 months after we started the Finding Places project, you can see the mayor laying down the first Lego brick. This project was a state-of-the-art, unique community engagement and public participation effort to bring people together first to understand where the refugees are, what is their situation now in the city, on top of that Cityscope platform, but then to also co-create and really find those locations using the tools. The tools were reactive. They told the people where to put those housing and what can they actually build.
Talking about results, the citizens themselves have identified 161 places which could accommodate 23,000 refugees. Apart from these impressive numbers, Finding Places was a kind of social catalyst for the city of Hamburg. It helped to avoid that not in my backyard feeling, and it helped to make Hamburg a welcoming place, a place that can really think and have the mentality of, yes, we can, of course.
This project is currently being cited worldwide as a success story for the usage of those socio-technical platforms like the Cityscope for the creation of not just regular community engagement, but really in extreme cases.
And that was just the beginning of the cooperation of our laboratories. In the meantime, we have discovered a number of challenges on a global scale, but also in the local context. Here we have the Port City model, a simulation of how tourists transfer from the urban centers to the harbor area. We are doing this with agent-based modeling. And we are back at the Grasbrook area again. We are expecting a commission from the Hafen City to support the upcoming urban design competition with a new intelligent simulation tool.
And for this project, we're learning a lot of new things. One of them is that you can actually use the ladder instead of jump over the fence when you want to enter the Grasbrook site. But we're actually learning much more. We're looking into rebuilding, recreating the Cityscope platform from the ground up, so it could fit the needs, especially unique needs of the future projects, especially the Grasbrook one, but any other challenge that the Cityscope platform is facing. Our two labs, the HafenCity University and MIT, are working together as a team, as a network, in order to recreate that platform, that tool, and we're really waiting to be able to deploy it in the Grasbrook site and in other locations. We're actually developing a lot of other technologies. We're looking into developing the Cityscope in many different aspects. Maybe we go to the next slide. Thank you. We're looking into many different technologies and many different aspects, such as AI, machine learning, and other tools. But I think that beyond all of that sophistication, I guess the most important thing is that this brick can actually break walls and change mindsets. If you want to try it yourself, here you go.
Good reaction. Thank you.
Very good. So I'm now introducing Joelle Pianzola. We met Joelle in Dubai at a conference, and we were very excited about her work. So far, she's not one of our core researchers because she's located in Switzerland at ETH, because she's designing algorithms that matches refugees to their optimal cities where they are most likely to find a job. Joelle is the executive director of the Zurich branch of the Immigration Policy Lab, which is a cooperation with Stanford University in the US. And she has worked as a management consultant for international corporations and governments and also for the public sector. She received her PhD from the University of Lausanne, and she's now part of one of our advisory boards for a very big research project regarding refugee integration, and I really hope that we can keep working together with Joelle. The floor is yours. Employment rates among refugees are low worldwide, especially in the first years after arrival. We asked ourselves if there's a cost-efficient and effective way to change this with a solution that could be used worldwide. We looked into a lot of data of refugees that arrived or came to Switzerland and the United States in the last decades. And the results showed a very clear story. The place people are sent to matters for their integration. So the city or town someone goes to can really act as an on-ramp towards successful integration or an obstacle. And we are looking into this in more detail. We really want to set out and change the way this is done today with a simple but powerful idea. Because today, refugees are allocated at random within countries. And what we want to do is really match people to places where they are most likely to find a job. The way we do this is that we developed an algorithm that uses existing data that we have on refugees and identifies the synergies between people's characteristics and places. With machine learning and optimal matching, the algorithm is able to predict the probability of success, so the chances to find a job at each possible location based on trends and patterns in the historical data. The algorithm is also able to take into account real-world constraints, such as available capacities at different locations or distribution keys that governments might have. What the algorithm then does is really identify the optimal place for a person or a family, and then makes a recommendation what the best match would be and where someone is most likely to find a job. The algorithm that we developed is dynamic and can respond to different changes at each location and take that into account. So what we do is really human-centered artificial intelligence, where the recommendation that the algorithm gives is meant to complement and not replace the decision-making of case workers and officials. We looked into data in Switzerland and the United States and ran backtests, and the results were very staggering. We could show that employment rates could be improved by 40 to 70% in both countries with that matching technology. This is still theory that we are now putting into practice. The algorithm is currently tested in the real world. In partnership with the State Secretariat for Migration, we're running a randomized controlled trial in Switzerland among a subset of asylum seekers that are currently arriving in Switzerland. What we're doing is that half of the people in the trial are allocated to cities and towns within Switzerland with the algorithm. The other half of the people are allocated to places within Switzerland at random, the way it is done today. What we're basically doing is really use the power of data to learn from the past and improve the future. And our goal really is to not only help refugees rebuild their lives, but also help them increase their chances to unlock their potential to contribute to their new home countries.
So John Clippinger is an old friend. He is the former co-director of the Law Lab at the Berkman Center at the Harvard Law School. He's now a researcher in my group at the MIT Media Lab. We call John the token master because he's one of the leading lights in exploring creative uses of tokenization, blockchain, smart contracts, cryptocurrency, etc. So John Clippinger, Economies Without Currency.
Thank you, Ken. Well, what I'd like to do is talk about nodes. And we talked about earlier about how do we transition to a bottom-up, autonomous forms of organization and urbanization that are consonant with the Earth. And what we're confronted with is a series of existential threats. I don't have to elaborate on that, but we have climate change, we have extinctions of species, we have all these challenges before us. And the question is, how do we design something that's based in nature, from initial principles, and not have extractive technology, not have extractive ways of organizing yourself, but basically look at outcomes. How do we design around outcomes? And use generative design as a way of designing a system from the beginning to have resilience, have zero carbon, have affordability, have equity. It's built into the system itself. It's part of how it's designed and function. This is a biological concept, very different than a mechanical concept. So when you look at what they're doing at Cityscope, and the idea there of the radar map is to identify the different kind of asset classes, and Kent talked about this earlier, how they're interdependent. Well, the question is then, how do we incentivize that? How do we really create an economic system that reinforces that and makes that by design? So this, again, it comes back to the concept of generative design. Basically, the idea, how do you create genetic algorithms? How do you have selection principles, like fitness principles, that reduce the cost, and increase the performance and utilization and overall miniaturization of technology. You see this what's happening in new kinds of technologies in each sector. This is from BlackRock, where you have 20 different sectors that are all subject to exponential growth. It's deflationary. So there's real costs that can be captured if they can be internalized. So the idea here is create an attractor for capital, take it out of the fossil economy and put it into a sustainable economy based upon biological principles. That's the idea of a strange attractor. Can we create new kind of asset classes that accelerate the transition? Because we're at a point where this has to be done very quickly. It's 2030 is really the due date. So then again, things are being virtualized now. We can create digital twins. Machine learning can recognize things. We can identify the title, the authorization, the permissions that go with different kinds of virtual representations, and we can implement our policies that way in a new way, which in turn requires a new kind of charter. Our corporate charters are very old. They're based upon shipping. So in the physical world, we need to do something that's relevant to the digital world, the rapidly changing world. And so we had to come up with a concept of a reflexive mutual series LLC, big words. Reflexive in the sense that invests in itself. It's not extraction capital out. It reinvests in itself. It's mutual, and then it's owned by everybody in the community, in the group, and you get mutual benefits. The other side of it is it's based upon the concept of metabolism, mitosis. So we have this idea of metabolic capital, that you have the ability of one kind of asset class building upon another, and you can use genetic algorithms to accelerate the change. This is the new way of thinking, and to bring it back to how we're thinking about Cityscope, we want to have basically a currency system, Ken mentioned tokens, that reinforce the values, allow people living in a geofenced area to create value and keep a homeostasis of a value system based upon sustainability, affordability, and equity. This is the new vision. This is how these two pieces come together and create new asset classes that build equity over a period of time. So it's a new way of looking at capital, and it's a way of giving power to a community, a new kind of corporate organization that we've seen before. Thank you. That's fast.
Great. Our next guest is Maya Göppel. Maya Göppel is Secretary General of the German Advisory Council on Global Change. We as the lab have followed Maya's work already for quite a long time, and I was very excited when she confirmed. We haven't known each other before in personal. She is well known in Germany for her thinking of how to implement sustainability, and she's also quoted by a lot of people from the Fridays of Future generation. I think Maya is a kind of influencer. She's very active on Twitter, and I think a lot of young people follow her thoughts. She's a political economist, and her expertise lies in system innovations for sustainable development. This is more now an input that comes from the political science side. It's not so much about technical innovations. She will talk more about governance. And we as a lab always try to combine the social perspective or the political perspective to the technical perspectives. This can be a good example for this combination. Maya wrote a very successful book in 2016, The Great Mind Shift, and she's also a member of the Club of Rome. the title of her speech, Sustainability Without Compromise.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm very happy, Geza, for the invitation that you issued and was very, very happy to come here. I will talk from the perspective of really big picture. That's the kind of organizations I have been working for and am still working for. And these big pictures shows us graphs like this. And this big picture means that we have to rethink our operating system of Spaceship Earth, as Buckminster Fuller would have called it and said it. And I would like for us to go into our human capabilities of being a species that can imagine futures and that can change the stories by which we're guiding the futures and can change that operating system. And we think on a societal level, that operating system is economics. And when you look at these graphs, you can see that the design principle of economics is very similar to the design principle of what we've seen in the Anthropocene and with the problems that it's brought to us. This is why I call it the repair mode sustainability, because the idea was we grow the economy bigger and bigger, and then we have the money to repair our ecosystems and to pay a little bit to the people that haven't benefited in the first round of production and distribution. It also means that we have started to looking at things that should be tools. So if we start about economics, think about economics as social technologies, growth, profits, productivity, innovation, output, competitiveness, all of those are measured in monetary terms right now, and we pursue those as if they were goals in themselves. Unfortunately, those are blind to the things that sustainability has as its core. That's human needs, and that is the regenerative force of that spaceship Earth that we have inherited and are happy to be part of. And this is why I think it's fascinating to see when you do the same Google image search that I've done for that iconography, to look at how is the future of sustainable economies imagined. And it becomes very round, which shouldn't be too surprising when we think about planet Earth and the image that we first had in 1968 from space, being that planet Earth dispensed in the big universe. And then the Brundtland report of 87 says, this has to upset our human self-image. And this is why the invitation is when we start thinking about how do we make these things scale? I mean, that's the question that political economists are after. All the great solutions we saw today, how do we make them scale so that we get out of repair mode and make the operating system sustainable by design? And this is why things like the Sustainable Development Goals are really important. Those are very widened goal sets that we start talking about goals that we want to achieve with the things that we do. And since it sometimes seems daunting to do that on a global space and scale, especially right now with the geopolitics that we've been targeting or seeing before, it is the cities level that is so promising, and the city-rural connection. There we can start talking about what are our goals, how can we use new technologies. We saw just now the way of tagging the resource flows, really expressing what are our values, what are our needs, what are our joint endeavors as social beings as well, that we strive to achieve, and how do we find then the innovations in the economic system that can make those happen. I'd like to conclude with just the invitation, because we so often hear its costs, it's intensely non-financeable, or it's difficult to find the finances right now. But for me it was striking, to see how much money we've been able to print to save the banks, and how weird it is to stand at the United Nations discussing the Sustainable Development Goals and seeing all the lack of funding that there is to achieve those that would really be proper value creation for the people. And on the same day, the banks declaring that they've got the exact amount of corporate profits in one bank in one quarter that it would need to finance achieving sustainable development, and of educating people to become the stewards of bringing about that sustainable world that we all want. There's not a shortage in money, there's a shortage of making the will and the proposal to use the economic system, tweak it so we can achieve those goals that we all are discussing about achieving here today. Thank you.
So we are still in the section of process, aren't we? Yes? Okay, so as I already mentioned, we are starting to work for the United Nations, and for this reason, the United Nations sent us a speaker. She will come by video. It's Atafe Riazi. She was unfortunately not able to come in person, but it's a great video message that she prepared for this conference. Atafe Riazi is Assistant Secretary General and Chief Information Technology Officer at the United Nations in New York. She was appointed 2013 by Ban Ki-moon, and she started her professional career with the Metropolitan Transit Authority of New York City. So she is originally an engineer, and she is in a way responsible for the technological innovations of the UN. And I'm very happy and very grateful that she prepared this video for us. The title is SDGs Without Technology, and SDGs means Sustainable Development Goals. You know that the UN published those goals, and we have to achieve these goals also with technology, and that's where she's responsible for.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Atafe Riazi, and I am the United Nations Assistant Secretary General and Chief Information Technology Officer. I'm sorry that I can't attend the Cities Without conference today, and big thanks to the CityScienceLab and the HafenCity University of Hamburg for giving me the opportunity to address you remotely. More than half of the world's population lives in urban areas, and this proportion is expected to rise to more than 2/3 by 2050. Up until 1975, there were only 3 megacities in the world, with over 10 million people each: New York, Tokyo, and Mexico City. Today, there are as many as 21. By 2025, this number is expected to grow to 29. To improve the lives of those who live in cities today, while accommodating such growth, technology is making great strides. Prosperous cities are both sustainable and inclusive. National and local cities are using technology to empower disadvantaged residents while tackling challenges in housing, transport, employment, security, and education, among facets of urban life. Technologies are used every day to improve the overall communal and individual daily lives of city residents, regardless of background. Nevertheless, while technology has immense potential to bridge socioeconomic disparities among city dwellers, it also has equal potential to increase the digital divide between cities and within the cities themselves. It's thus imperative to actively assist in the integration of technology among the underprivileged by forging cross-sectoral partnership between the public and the private sectors to ensure sustainability, to ensure that no one is left behind. Furthermore, cities confront vulnerabilities in their technological infrastructure through cyber attacks. For example, critical infrastructure such as power grids, water supplies, transportation hubs, and many other utilities are prone to compromise by outside actors. We stand ready to assist our member states in helping them build a strong capacity to prevent and mitigate the risks of such attacks. Finally, I'm happy to highlight that the UN Secretary General has established a high-level panel on digital cooperation. The panel submitted a really good and bold report with concrete recommendations, both to raise awareness about the transformative impact of digital technologies across society and economy, and to contribute to the broader public debate on how to ensure a safe and inclusive digital future for all. We're all at the cusp of a major change, and there is no doubt that the development of new technologies such as artificial intelligence or blockchain will help nations in achieving the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The fourth industrial revolution, of which these tools are a part, allows for new space to explore other technological advances that reduce inequalities, boost security, and reduce conflict, all while establishing fair, stable, and agile governance. Imagine achieving the SDGs without technology. Would that be possible? Thank you.
So our next speaker will come live on stage now. It's Michael Uwe Mendimo. Michael is co-founder, he comes from Nigeria, Port Harcourt, and he's co-founder and director of the collaborative media advocacy platform in Port Harcourt. He's also a senior visiting research fellow at King's College. Michael already joined our first workshop that we conducted with the United Nations, and he presented his work there. And I think there are a lot of similarities to the lecture of Lord Norman Foster, because he also works with informal settlement, and I'm happy that he could manage to come here again. He's also the producer of a documentary, of a film, of a movie, The Act of Killing. If you haven't seen it, I will really recommend this to you. So Michael is working with violently marginalized urban communities, and the title of his talk is Empowerment Without Privilege.
Hundreds of thousands of people in the marginalized waterfront communities of Nigeria's oil capital, Port Harcourt, live without access to the most basic of services, without sanitation, without drinkable water, without breathable air, and without a safe space, without that most fundamental of securities, that the roof above your head will not become rubble beneath your feet. These could be scenes from a post-natural disaster, the aftermath of an earthquake or a tsunami, but they're not. These are scenes from one of the dominant modes of African urbanism, a field that opens in that stark gap between the urban fantasies of the political class and the urban realities of cities like Port Harcourt. To live in these cities is to live in a city without, to be everywhere, but to be unseen and unheard, to be without a voice. And so, with the Human City Project, we set out to build platforms for community voice, to allow people to make themselves seen and heard, to take greater control over the shaping of their city. Chikoko Radio is building audiences citywide. Chikoko Studios allows young musicians to make and share music. Chikoko Cinema is an inflatable screen that allows overlooked people to put themselves in the picture. And Chikoko Maps is a participatory research and planning program that gives communities the power to put themselves on the map. And with hundreds of young people from across the city's informal waterfronts, we're building Chikoko Space, an iconic arts and advocacy platform. It's about more than designing a building, it's about building a movement. And so I want to give the final word to our young participants who made a 2-minute video for you to tell you what they're up to.
My heart's a radio, it only beats for the truth. We want a station that can speak out for the youths, where our stories make the news. When we have options, we would choose to watch facts instead of fiction. Reality is no sci-fi, no green screen picture. It's our story, what do we need a script for? Don't try to sugarcoat the bitterness of being poor.
Radio, cinema, maps and Susan, Chicago Collective.
When we have the space, we'll do it big. For now, we'll do it small. Great opportunity to break the wall of setback, oppression, and forced eviction. In the slum, create a space for our dreams and vision. Put ourselves in the map, be a part of the city. People live here, we want to live free.
Yeah,
we want to live free.
Chicago, radio, cinema, maps and Susan, Chicago Collective.
You know, nothing is a waste if it can be managed. The higher the carbon, more risks to the climate. Clean up our world, one plastic at a time. Chicago music to the world, our story in a song. When we got the space, we do it big, now let's do it small. People live here and we want to be free.
Radio, cinema, map and Susan, Chicago Collective.
We are Chicago Collective, supported by CIMA.
Thank you.
Great. So, yeah. So we are now in the next section. Personal is the title, and this is also our last section. So we are welcoming now two ladies from Helsinki, Finland. HafenCity University has a very long cooperation already with Helsinki, with Aalto University in Helsinki. They are very close partners, not only the CityScienceLab, also our architects. And our next speaker is Marketa Kytä and Marit Kalitani. Marketa is professor at Aalto University in Helsinki. She leads the research group and master's program in spatial planning and transportation engineering. Her background is environmental psychology. And Marit Kalitani, she is CEO and co-founder of Maptionaire. And Maptionaire is one of the most interesting companies who applies mapping with interactive elements to citizen engagement. And Helsinki has always been, at least for me, and I think also for our lab, a kind of role city regarding citizen engagement, regarding mapping. They know how to visualize data, they have really sophisticated tools, and they know how to engage citizens regarding city planning. This is why the title is something like Planning Without Shouting. Marketa and Marit, the floor is yours.
Do you think you can easily express your personal opinions in urban development projects? I'm afraid many of you say no. In this presentation, we will ask if public participation can be realized in a smarter way. Can digitalization help to realize participation without shouting?
Still, the reality often looks like this. We organize a lot of public events, workshops, and meetings to discuss with people. Usually, we get only few people to show up, and we also know in advance what they want to say. Maybe some of you have been in this situation, being able to share your thoughts, but most of you have been sitting silent.
Information we collect in these events often remains hard to handle and analyze afterwards. Typically, the end result looks like this. We get a bunch of post-it stickers that are very hard to process further.
We have not been happy with these existing approaches and methods. Urban planning and design obviously happens in places. Therefore, we have wanted to find a way to develop place-based public engagement. Our dream was to make broader public participation possible by using innovative digital tools.
Naturally, place-based data collection should happen online to guarantee the collection of very large data sets. Our innovation adds a whole new soft information layer to geographic information system on top of the traditional hard data layers of the system.
And our vision has come true. Currently, there are over 7,000 projects done with the Maptionnaire platform in over 30 countries. We have been happy to follow how creatively cities like New York, Denver, and Stockholm are using Maptionnaire. It has to be easy for the residents to participate, and fun also for the experts to create tools exactly fitting their projects.
According to our experiences, it really is possible to reach a high number of participants with reasonable effort. We can reach new residence groups like children and young people and minority language group. People can also participate individually without being influenced by group opinion.
Even more importantly, we have been able to produce high-quality, usable knowledge from people to planners. The place-based data is easy to integrate into existing systems. Planners have also been happy to get positive feedback from the residents, sometimes for the first time ever.
We have been rather surprised how eager cities actually have been to try map-based and other digital tools. They have been willing to test new tools and learn new practices. The collected knowledge has, in many cases, made a real difference.
Welcome to participate our workshop, Participation Without Consensus, tomorrow in HafenCity University. We want to discuss with you how smart participation can be realized throughout the planning process. Come and share your thoughts, how we can bring together various tools, information, and people to create more livable and lovable places in the future.
Heba Khalil is professor of architecture professor of sustainable urbanism at the Department of Architecture at Cairo University. She's also a graduate of the SPURS program at MIT, and her research is focused on community development, informal areas, and urban metabolism. So, Heba Khalil, development without formality.
Change. because that was
Oh, yeah,
wrong.
we
The order
jumped
was
the
wrong.
gun.
He was too fast. That was my turn. So what are we doing? So we can also, I think we can also get Thilo on stage now. It's easier,
why don't we do
probably.
that?
So we do this again, Kent, in a few minutes.
Okay.
So I welcome my very close colleague, Thilo Böhmann. He's from Hamburg, and I think some of you know Thilo because he's very active here in Hamburg, in the city of Hamburg. He's the deputy head of the Department of Computer Science of the University of Hamburg. And his research interests focus on IT management and digital transformation. And Thilo is also the co-founder of a platform that we here in Hamburg call Ahoy Digital in German. And this is a platform that brings together all the public universities in Hamburg because it's much better. We should work together. And this is really a platform where we have a lot of exchange, we regularly meet, and we also organize conferences. And Ahoy Digital is also one of our sponsors here. So this is in a way also an event made by Ahoy Digital. And I'm very happy that Thilo is now here. And Thilo studied in Munich, and he is also studied at the London School of Economics, so political science and computer science. Thilo, the mic is yours.
We study ecosystems, not real ones, digital ones, underneath our digital cities. So let's be more specific because that's very abstract, right? So this is Rudy from Hamburg, a little local guy. Rudy wants to cycle more, it's good for the climate and himself, but he needs a good used bike. So he goes to eBay, as we all do, and Googles or eBays for a good used bike. And then he clicks on accept, right? And accept is something we do so much in the digital world. If you click on accept, you're part of the digital ecosystem of eBay. This is a big ecosystem. By clicking on accept, you agree to basically share your surfing behaviors with 900 legal entities around the world. It's China, it's the US, it's the EU, it's everywhere. Global surveillance capitalism. Now back to Hamburg and our city. Let's think mobility of the future. And just think of the choices we have. So we have Rudy again. Rudy can do bike sharing, car sharing, transit. He can do scooter sharing, all just a fingertip away, but all very much location-based apps. So when you engage with these services, you immediately expose your locations to a big ecosystem of companies. 38 in just these 9 examples, Google and Facebook just there in the background. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, it's a great opportunity. There are great services that we can use, but we need to think about what it does to us in terms of the behavior we are exposing. Don't get me wrong. I like this data sharing idea. The integration we get through all these services, the designers can do. We're actually looking at the observable behavior of users, the decisions we can take in cities by basing decision on data. But if you share your fingerprint, a lot of data taken together gives you a pretty unique profile, and anonymous is not anonymous in the end. So let's think about the cities we want. Primarily, cities were about freedom, but now urbanites are the best surveyed people on the planet. I don't think this is my view of the city of the future. So what can we do to fix this? What can we do to work against cities being cities of surveillance? First and foremost, I think we need ecosystem awareness and management. That's something we actually study across several universities here. Can we actually see how much exposed we are to this big ecosystems of data sharing? Can we make it transparent? Can we make it explicit for people to agree to? And can we also enable developers of new services to see what they're doing? Sometimes exposure is just a click away. Secondly, I think we need much better regulation on location-based data. I'm really surprised. This is a vital data stream that shows everything about you, where you live, eat, pray, everything is in the location. Why isn't there better and enforceable standards for how we deal with location data? And third, I think we need to think hard about information governance in these areas. Who do we want to regulate our data? Is it just us, the me? Well, we can do that, but it's tedious. Is it the big platform? Well, it's very convenient, but a little bit carnivorous if you think surveillance capitalism. Is it the state? Well, that's would be not my idea. I think we need to think about this idea of urban data cooperatives, sharing data, making it accountable to the membership. We have a great history of cooperatives in this country. They look a bit antiquated at the moment, but I think they paved a path for many villagers in a position of powerlessness to become part of agribusiness and banking. Why can't we copy that model to the digital world? That's something you're interested in, come to the workshop tomorrow for Cities About Privacy and engage for cities that are functional but also set us free. Thank you very much.
Okay. So we were on our way towards Summit without screw-ups until I went out of sequence. So I apologize to Thilo and Heba, but I've introduced Heba. So if she could come out to talk about development without formality.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you for introducing me. Thank you. Let me start by some propositions. Consuming less does not mean you're more green. Perhaps you're just using your resources more. If you look at this graph, yes, most of the countries try to provide more for their inhabitants, but how they are doing. All the yellow and orange dots are more of the African countries. They are way below the world biocapacity, but they are not providing enough for their inhabitants. So yes, you're consuming less, but you're actually perhaps more poor. Informal and formal urbanisms follows resources. So if you look at Cairo, Cairo is 100 kilometers wide from east to west. The city is expanding in all directions, east, west, north, and south. More than 20 million people live in this mega city. But how are they doing this? How this city is going and expanding? In Egypt, we consume a lot of resources. Our ecological footprint is increasing 3 to 4 times in the past 40 years, while our biocapacity is almost the same, if not decreasing. This is a per capita share. And yes, again, the city is expanding. It's a blob of light all day. This is a night scene from Cairo, and you can see it is lit up all through the city. We try to learn from informal growth. How can we do that? If you look at Cairo, 60% of the city is informal. All the blue areas are unplanned or informal, while the yellow parts are the planned or the formal part of the city. How can we, in this growth, decouple the impact of growth and the resource use in such a resource-scarce environment? Sorry. Again, all the red parts are the informal, just to remind you, while the gray parts are the formal city. So how can we learn from this in order to become more efficient? We started a research at Cairo University about this thing, but if you can Google Cairo, the first images that you'd find is the nice Nile with the nice buildings overlooking the Nile, but the reality is different. The reality is the more lively areas, the more informal, the congestion, you have the marketplaces where people are actually living. It's a totally different story. This is Cairo 1904, and then in almost 100 years, you get this growth on all the areas. Interestingly, informal systems keep the city working. How does this happen? We started research at Cairo University looking at one informal district. It's Mbaba. It has more than 1 million people living over there. And looking at Zamalek, which is a city core, upscale neighborhood with around 70,000 inhabitants. Again, the informal systems, yes, keep the city working. We investigated the resource flow or the materials flow through these areas, and we found interesting things. If you look at the Sankey diagrams, yes, the inhabitants of Mbaba, they use less, they reuse more. So their waste is very less, but it ends in landfills because it mostly is organic waste. While the Zamalek area, the more affluent people use more resources, and they generate too much waste, but with very high recycling rate. So they have low consumption versus the higher consumption with recycling. That is done by the informal system. So mostly it is done by the informal system. How to create value for the downstream, the organic waste that ends up on the street. This is something to be considered. How to capture the informal local systems, the affordability, the accessibility, and the efficiency of these systems into the formal part of the city becomes the greater question. Please join us tomorrow in our workshop about development without informality if you want to know more. Thank you.
Okay, one last talk. How's everyone doing? Good? All right. Todd Machover, he is the head of the academic program at the MIT Media Lab. He also directs the Opera of the Future group. Todd was trained at Juilliard, and he was the first director of musical research at Pierre Boulez's ICAM in Paris. Todd is exploring a new process for bottom-up community creation of symphonic music. Todd had planned to be here today, but he couldn't make it, so he recorded this short video. And by the way, Todd asked us to turn this up loud, if you would.
The symphony is one of the most majestic and significant forms of classical music. It's also one of the most hierarchical. Imagine Beethoven composing his Ninth Symphony when he was deaf. So he heard all of that music inside his head, wrote it down in bad handwriting on manuscript paper, delivered it to a conductor who learned it, taught it to an orchestra, who then delivered it to people around the world. So it was from Beethoven's mind to millions and millions of people over the centuries. We're trying to imagine the symphony as a completely opposite process, as one of the most bottom-up processes that you can imagine. At the Media Lab over these last 6 years, we've invented a form called city symphonies. The idea is to create a portrait of a city, to do that with music, but also by listening to the city and understanding what it is about the actual sounds in that city that tell its story. And then we invite everybody in the city to collaborate with myself and my team at the MIT Media Lab to create this piece. Since everybody in the city has different views of what that city feels like, where it's been, where it's going, it's a fantastic method for connecting people with a common theme and common purpose through sound to make something together. I'd like to share with you now one glimpse of these city symphonies. This is from Symphony in D, which we created for the city of Detroit. And you'll first see a bit of a trailer which shows something about the making of this piece, and then you'll hear a little bit from the world premiere performance. In full disclosure, there's an orchestra on stage. It's the Detroit Symphony Orchestra, but in a rather different form. The orchestra is combined with all these sounds of the city and with many people from Detroit who I met during the project. So you'll see middle schoolers playing with electronic instruments, techno artists, chorus from a nearby church, African drummers, electric bass players, all kinds of different people who normally wouldn't be on stage with an orchestra. So maybe a new kind of music, a totally new kind of process, a symphony made by a city for all of you to hear. I hope you enjoy it.
If you can't see
we are not done yet. If you don't recognize the genius in refusing to be generic, if you still can't tell the difference between the boom and the bass, you've never been to Detroit. But don't worry, we'll still be here when you decide to learn.
So that was our program. I hope we inspired you a bit with all the ideas from our network. Thank you for listening. And I would like to say something. This was an experiment. We were not able to rehearse it. Some people arrived this morning. We got the presentations midnight yesterday. So I would really like to thank the whole team from Elbphilharmonie and also Holger Prang, who's up there, for their flexibility and their great technical support. Thank you very much. I would also like to thank all our sponsors. I cannot name them all, but what I like is that they are not only sponsors, most of them are also collaborators. We work with them, we set up projects with them, and that's very nice. It's not only about money, it's also about collaboration. Then I would like to mention that tonight we are having a party, a big party. There is a boat in the harbor. It's called Stubnitz. Most of you know it. I actually don't know the address, but if you Google Stubnitz, you will find it. It's close to our university, HafenCity University. It's a bit, when you go to Barkenhöft. So we will start there at 9:30, 10 o'clock p.m., and it's open for everyone. So if you want to meet those people here, if you want to network, most of the speakers will be there on the boat tonight, and we are really looking forward to see you all there. Then now there is a short press conference. The media, people from the media who are still here, they can come with us now to the press conference. And that's what I wanted to say, and I hand over to you for the second day.
Well, I just wanted to thank you and your team for how wonderful you have been to work with, and particularly for Maggie, Ariel, Gabi from my team.
And Sarah.
And Zara.
And Yannick and Sarah
exactly.
From our team, and a lot more.
And many more. I think we brought 19 people from MIT here today, so it's a big group. Tomorrow, we will drill down into many of these themes and quite a few others in a series of mini conferences, workshops that we're doing. So if you're interested in learning more, these were just teasers. Come tomorrow and engage in a conversation and exploration about the future.
Yeah, and it's open tomorrow. It's public. You don't have to register. You can just come and get into the workshops and work with us. So thank you very much for coming and listening, and I wish you a good day, evening.